Hello everyone, it is that time once again to be talking about the BFI London Film Festival. For those of you that are new here, I have been covering the festival in some shape or form, I think every year since 2018. And in recent years what I've done is I've done one big video covering every single film that I saw at the festival, and that's once again what I'm going to do. This year I was able to see 17 different films, all varying in quality, so without any further ado I'm just going to get straight into it by talking about the first film that I saw, which was an Icelandic drama called When the Light Breaks. And now I'm going to be honest, I didn't really know much about this one going into it, other than the fact that it debuted at Cannes Film Festival earlier in the year, and you're going to hear me say that quite a bit throughout this video. Because compared to last year's lineup in the festival, where you had some real heavy hitters like The Boy and the Heron, Killers of the Flower Moon and Maestro, this year even the big films were fairly low-key ones, and there were a lot of films I went into this year that I genuinely didn't know much about, so a lot of them were blind watches for me. Thankfully though, I started the festival off really strongly because When the Light Breaks is a genuinely fantastic little drama that deals with grief and the way that different people deal with that, but also the sudden nature that death can sometimes have, as well as the varying emotions that different people have to go through when dealing with a loss that is very close to them. I really liked this film. It was a very heavy one to start the festival with, but I'm kind of thankful that I started it with this one because it was so good. It's shot gorgeously. There is a natural beauty to this film that it really revels in, and I really appreciated that. The performances are all fantastic, and I really loved the shifting dynamics of the core friend group that are mourning the loss of their friend. I really appreciated that they all looked out for each other, but there are still tensions between them where necessary. It doesn't get wrapped up in that drama, it just kind of addresses it and shows everything in a very naturalistic manner, which I thought really paid off for this film. After that, I then watched a small independent comedy called So Far So Good. I'm going to be honest, I purely watched this one for the title alone. I didn't really know anything about it. I saw the title and was like, yes, I need to watch that. Unfortunately though, this film didn't work for me. I can appreciate what it was trying to do. It was trying to blend this sort of offbeat humour with absurdist comedy, and in a couple of scenes it works a little bit, but for the most part it really just didn't work. I think what the directors were able to do on such a limited low budget I think works for the most part, but this film really didn't work with me. You need to be in a specific mindset for that type of humour to work, and it's a very hit and miss sort of thing, and for me it was very miss. And yeah, I can't see myself rewatching this anytime soon, unfortunately. After that, I then watched this small drama called My Eternal Summer, which follows a 15-year-old girl called Fanny who has recently just finished high school, but rather than spending the summer with her friends, which is what she wants to be doing, she instead has to spend the summer with her family, as that is the dying wish of her terminally ill mother. Now, I saw a lot of potential in the premise of this film, in terms of the drama that they could have really pulled from. But the thing is, this film goes for a 50-50 split in terms of its execution. Half of it is a slice of life drama that you're just kind of observing, and the other half is that drama that I was on about. And unfortunately, I kind of wish it had leaned more into the drama. The slice of life stuff is very good, and can genuinely be quite engaging at times, but then there are other times where it does drag the pacing down. For worse, I'd say. Again, this isn't a bad film, I do recommend it, and I think for a directorial debut, I think it is very well shot and very well directed. I just wish it had leaned into the dramatic elements, such as the tensions that rise from the situation that this family is in. But it only dabbles into that a couple of times, and I really wish it had gone a little bit further. With that being said, I thought the ending was very well done. The final few moments of this film really do hit you with an emotional gut punch that actually pays off, and considering how lukewarm I was to the rest of the film, the fact that the ending worked for what it was really impressed me. After that, I then watched this small Chinese drama called All Shall Be Well. Again, I didn't know anything about this one going into it, but this is yet another film that deals with grief. You can kind of see a recurring theme here with a lot of the films that I saw at the festival. But this one actually kind of grew on me the more that it went on. I was kind of psyching myself up for another slice of life drama similar to My Eternal Summer. But after a certain point, there is actually a plot and a motivating factor to the film that keeps it driving and actually keeps it more investing as the film goes on. And I genuinely was kind of won over by this film by the time it ended. I do think the first half of the film does take a little while to get going, but once all the pieces start showing themselves and then start fitting into place, I really appreciated what it was trying to do. And it definitely has a lot to say about the whole legal system in China when a loved one passes away, especially if you are part of an LGBT partnership. After that, I then saw the opening film of the festival, which was Blitz, the new film by Steve McQueen. I was really looking forward to this one because I really like Steve McQueen as a filmmaker. Even some of his weaker films, like Widows, I still find a lot to appreciate and like about that. But yeah, this film really worked for me. I know it kind of got a bit of a mixed reception from the other people that I know that saw it at the festival. But personally for me, now that I've had time to sit on it, I think it worked. When you compare it to his other films, it can feel a bit messy and a little bit jumbled. But when you look at it on its own, I think what he was trying to go for really works. Is it still a bit messy in places? Yes. Is the messaging a little bit heavy-handed? Yes. But again, what the intent that was there, I think, is very, very, very well executed. I thought the emotional core of the film was very strong. I really appreciated the fact that the film took its time to really try and showcase a little bit of everything when it comes to British culture during World War II, because that's not something that's really been seen that much on film, at least in a big budget sort of way like this film does. You see it quite a bit in documentaries, but even then they kind of just tackle one thing at a time, whereas this film takes its time to address women in the factories, or air raid wardens, or the evacuees being sent off to the countryside. It takes its time to tackle all of these different aspects, and though it feels like it's trying to cram a bit of everything in, I really did appreciate the fact that it tried to cover all of those bases and show a little bit of everything, which I think really works in the film's favour. I think also the film can have some genuinely visceral scenes as well. There are quite a few moments where my heart was in my mouth because of how intense they were, especially the opening scene where you see these firefighters trying to struggle to put a fire out that one of the bombs has caused. That whole scene, the fact that they chose to open with that, is white-knuckled, and it definitely puts you back in your seat when you're watching it. After that, I then saw the newest film from Malcolm Washington called The Piano Lesson. I think this is the third film adaptation of an August Wilson play, the first two being Fences and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. I've not seen those previous two films, but I've heard a lot of good things about them. But I went into this film fairly intrigued. Funnily enough, this was not the film I was initially intending on seeing. Originally, I was going to see a film called The Balconettes, but then at the last minute, the BFI changed the timings of two of the films, and I ended up seeing this instead, which I'm not complaining about because I ended up quite liking this film. But I just thought that'd be an interesting little thing to mention. But yes, The Piano Lesson is a very good drama. It's a very good play adaptation. And that's kind of all I can really say about it. If you're a fan of single location film adaptations of plays, then I think you're going to find a lot to appreciate about The Piano Lesson. That's definitely something that's up my street, and I really appreciated a lot of the aspects of this film. I think Malcolm Washington's direction is superb. I think he frames all of the shots really well, and he definitely adds a cinematic quality to the film that might not necessarily have been present in the previous two. And I think he did a really good job. The performances across the board are fantastic. My only issue is that I found that John David Washington at first felt like he was still acting for the stage, because I realised that in the stage version of this, him and Samuel L. Jackson, who are both in this film, have recently just done a turn of this on Broadway, and you can kind of tell that John David Washington is still acting for the stage in this film. He is very good, but he is kind of really going for it in a few specific scenes. The standout, however, is Danielle Deadwyler, who is genuinely fantastic in this movie. Like I said, the performances across the board are very good, but she is the clear standout. And a lot of the really intense and pivotal scenes in this film wouldn't work nearly as well if her performance wasn't as good as it was. After that, I then saw Conclave, which is the newest film from director Edward Berger, who recently gave us the remake of All Quiet on the Western Front. I didn't really know much about this film going into it, other than the fact that it was directed by who it's directed by, and the fact that it had Ralph Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, and John Lithgow in the film. That is literally all I knew, and that it was about something to do with Catholics. But yeah, considering how little I knew going into this was probably my biggest surprise of the festival. I absolutely loved Conclave. If you're looking for a tense, genuinely gripping drama that will keep you on the edge of your seat for about 2 hours, this is the film for you. Even if you're not necessarily into Catholicism or religion in general, there is still a lot to appreciate about this movie. It raises a lot of questions about all kinds of religions. It puts these people against each other in a way that is genuinely gripping and intense. And I don't think that would work nearly as well if these actors weren't all working at the top of their game. The performances across this film are fantastic, especially Ralph Fiennes, who really brings this film home. And again, the film kind of leans on him being as good as he is, and it's just fantastic. The way this film is shot as well is kind of gorgeous in places. There are a few specific shots in this film that I was genuinely in awe of, and it's kind of the only film of the festival where I was taken aback by the cinematography. Don't get me wrong, there were some beautiful looking films throughout the festival, but this was the only one that I can remember where a couple of specific shots came on the screen and I was like, wow, that is a gorgeous looking shot. After that, I then watched the new Elton John documentary, Never Too Late, directed by RJ Cutler and David Furnish. I decided to give this one a go because it was the only thing after Conclave on that day that interested me. I like Elton John, I'm a sucker for a music documentary, so I thought, screw it, I'll give it a go. And it's not bad. It's quite a nice little documentary. It doesn't really do anything to reinvent the wheel per se. But if you're looking for just a solid music documentary about Elton John's career, this will give you everything you kind of need. It does introduce some interesting things every now and then, like there is this whole section about his relationship with John Lennon, which I genuinely didn't know anything about, and that whole section was fascinating. But that being said, everything else in this film, if you've seen Rocket Man, you've kind of already seen it. After that, I then watched Sean Baker's Palme d'Or winning Anora. Now, I was a little bit sceptical going into this because the only Sean Baker film I've seen up to this point was The Florida Project. And I wasn't a massive fan of The Florida Project. So I at least wanted this film to be good and just better than that. And that's cool, kind of all I wanted from it. And thankfully, Anora is so much better than The Florida Project. This is probably my favourite film I've seen of his, which again isn't saying much because this is the only second film I've seen of his. But this is fantastic. It's a blast of chaotic energy that I needed at that time in the festival. It's funny, a lot funnier than I was expecting it to be. The performances are all fantastic in this film. They feel very natural and real, so when the chaotic stuff starts to happen, it just feels genuinely chaotic, both because of Sean Baker's camera work, but also because of how all over the place these performances can be. Mikey Madison in particular is fantastic in this movie. She's very stuck up and she is very assertive in this movie, but then towards the end when she needs to show real emotion, she does a very good job of doing that as well. The next film I saw at the festival is possibly one of the most conflicting films I've seen all year, which was Emilia Pérez. This film is very ambitious, I'll say that. It's very ambitious with what it wants to do and what it tries to do. Whether those fully work or not, I'm still trying to make my mind up on. But it's a very strange movie. It is both a crime drama, a romance, and also a musical. And whether it succeeds in any of those areas, I'm not 100% sure. I appreciate the ambitious nature of this film. I really liked that it went for it in a few specific places. The musical numbers, though they can feel very out of place and strange, do work, and I think they are very well executed. I think the staging and performance of the musical numbers is very well done. I've definitely not forgotten some of them since watching the film. They've definitely stuck in my head. But it's just the fact that, do they need to be there, and does it need to be in the same context as this gritty drug cartel crime drama that is also trying to set up at the start? There's a lot of conflicting things about this film, which is why I'm still a bit all over the place with my thoughts on it. There's a lot of things I liked about the film, there's a lot of things I didn't like. There was a point towards the end of the film where I just kind of stopped caring about the characters, which isn't a good sign. But these events were happening on the screen, and I was just like, I don't care anymore. Anything could happen, and I'm just lost out of it now. But like I said, it's well shot. The performances across the board are fantastic. The musical numbers are pretty good. But it's just a weird mishmash of genres that really shouldn't exist, but it does. Thankfully, after Emilia Pérez, I then watched a string of films that were pretty much just all bangers. The first of those being DreamWorks' newest film, The Wild Robot. This was one of my most anticipated films of the festival, and I'm so glad I got to watch it while at the festival, because it is fantastic. It is arguably DreamWorks' best film in years. I loved almost everything about it. I thought the way it blended 2D and 3D animation was kind of ingenious. It's simple but really effective. Basically, all of the animals and the natural environments are 2D hand-drawn animated, whereas anything that's robotic or futuristic or sci-fi leaning is 3D CG animated. And that blend really, really works, and adds a lot of texture to the look of the film as well. I thought it had a really good sense of humour. It's got a lot of heart to it that really hits in the final act. I thought it was very emotional. I did cry. I don't want to admit it, but I did. And it's just a very good movie. I don't really have much else to say about The Wild Robot that hasn't already been said, but it is fantastic, and it is just, it's worth your time. If you can get a chance to see The Wild Robot, do so. After The Wild Robot, I then watched my second documentary of the festival, which was Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. I'm going to be brutally honest, I like the original Superman films, but I don't have as much of an emotional attachment to those movies than some other people do. I didn't grow up watching them, I watched them very late. So I appreciate them for what they did, but like, I don't have a strong personal connection to those films. That being said though, this documentary is incredible. It's possibly my favourite documentary of the whole year. It's just so incredibly informative and insightful, and very emotional towards the back end of it. As soon as they basically mentioned that he was best mates with Robin Williams very early on in the documentary, I immediately thought to myself, oh god, this is gonna hit me in the feels, isn't it? I think one core thing that I really appreciate about this film is that it just generally looks at the life and legacy that Christopher Reeve had and has left behind without sugarcoating anything. If there is anything it needs to highlight that is a little bit negative, it will do that, but then we'll also still look at him as a genuinely nice person and all the research and the things that he did when he became wheelchair bound. And I thought there was a really lovely balance of those two things without leaning too far to one or the other. And yes, it's just a really good documentary. After that, I then watched this small Irish comedy called Four Mothers. Out of any film in the festival, this is the one I knew the least about. I went into this one just hoping for it to be good, but in terms of its premise or who was behind it, I was like, I know nothing about it. And thankfully, I came away genuinely loving it. This is a brilliant little comedy that had me laughing very consistently, but also has genuine heart and drama to it that never feels out of place, and again, feels very balanced with what it's trying to do. My favourite thing about this whole film is the writing. I just really liked how they kept piling more and more things onto the main character to the point where he just couldn't deal with it anymore. Now, with some comedies, they can kind of overdo this and make it very exaggerated, and it's kind of like, oh, look how much stuff he's trying to do. But here, because everything else is so grounded and feels very warm and, you know, natural, it makes these constantly piling things just the more stressful for the main character, but just the more comedically rewarding for us as an audience. I thought the performances across the board were fantastic, especially the titular four mothers. I thought they were hilarious. The way that they bounce off of each other is genuinely fantastic and led to some of the funniest moments in the entire film. After that, I then watched a film called On Falling, which follows a Portuguese online warehouse picker in Scotland who lives a very lonely life, and that's kind of it. That's kind of all the film really gives you. And compared to My Eternal Summer, where it was trying to blend dramatic with slice of life, this film literally just is a slice of life drama. There isn't really a plot to the film. You're just kind of observing her going about her day. And at first it can get a bit repetitive and monotonous, but then when you realise what her job is and the lonely nature of her life, it really starts to hit home, and especially towards the second half of the film, where the lonely aspect of her character starts to kind of take a toll on her. It really does pay off. After that, I then watched my most anticipated film of the entire festival, which was A Real Pain, directed by Jesse Eisenberg, starring him and Kieran Culkin. I'm just going to say it. This is my favourite film I saw at the entire festival, and is possibly one of my favourite films of the entire year. Everything about this film just worked for me. It's incredibly funny in places, purely down to Kieran Culkin's performance. He's like this ball of energy that just won't stop, but then when things become a bit too much and he needs to show his emotional side, those do come to the forefront very, very well. I thought Jesse Eisenberg's direction was fantastic. I thought the way he framed a lot of the film and let those moments balance each other out, I thought was perfect. And he's also not afraid to let some of the more tender moments just kind of speak for themselves. For example, there is a moment in the film where the tour group that these two characters are with go to visit a concentration camp for the first time. And any sense of humour or energy is pushed to one side, and you just kind of observe them taking in the weight of what they're witnessing. And it's a really hard-hitting moment in the film, and it just really worked. The second to last film I saw at the festival was Mike Leigh's newest film, Hard Truths. I didn't really know much about this film going into it. The only film of his I've seen previously is Secrets and Lies, which I absolutely loved. And I was kind of expecting a little bit more of that, and you kind of do get that with Hard Truths. It is very much a kitchen sink, very grounded British drama that focuses purely on the characters at the forefront. And for the most part, I thought this film worked for me. There are a few moments where it can feel like it's trying to go a bit further than it should with its messaging, or it can just be a bit on the nose in places. But I thought by the end of the film, it really, really, really worked. However, the standout of this film is clearly Marianne Jean-Baptiste, who I think this is her first time collaborating with Mike Leigh since Secrets and Lies. She is great in this movie. She plays this very bitter woman who just finds anything to complain about literally anything in the world. Like, she'll just be going out shopping and then will just complain about a person who's in front of her that hasn't done anything wrong. She will just find something to complain about, and it can lead to some very funny moments, but also some very heartbreaking moments as well. And I thought those moments were very well balanced. She shows a lot of vulnerability despite how cruel she can be, and again, I really liked seeing that in this film. Again, it is mainly down to her performance. I think she is fantastic in this film, and she is definitely the driving force of the movie. And finally, the last film that I saw at the BFI 2024 London Film Festival was Luca Guadagnino's Queer. I was quite intrigued by this one. I feel like Guadagnino for me can be a director who's a bit hit and miss. I love Call Me By Your Name, but I thought Bones and All was a bit overrated. But that being said, I loved Challengers, which only came out a few months ago. So I think coming off of the hype of Challengers and having loved it as much as I did, I was hoping for another home run. And I didn't get that with Queer. Instead, I ended up getting one of the most pretentious films I've seen of the entire year. Which is a shame, because there is a lot of good things going for this film. Daniel Craig is magnetic in the lead role. The film is shot gorgeously. The way it utilises its film cinematography is stunning. It genuinely feels like you're watching a film that was shot in the 60s or 70s. And it's so gorgeously shot. The first half of this film is genuinely really engaging. There's some slight absurdist elements to the film in that first half that you can kind of take or leave, but all of the grounded romantic drama stuff I really appreciated. And then the film just decides to drive off a cliff. In the final act, which takes up about the last 30-40 minutes of the movie, it just decides to abandon the entire tone it's set up to begin with and just go off the rails into this psychedelic, drug-infused journey adventure thing. And I know that I'm not the only one who felt this. There were a couple of people that I saw this film with who felt the same way. But yes, that entire third act will make or break the film for you, and for me, it didn't work. I was on board with the film for almost everything up to that, and then it went weird, and then I just was kind of... It lost me. So that is everything that I watched at the 2024 BFI London Film Festival. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you were able to see any of these films during the festival, please let me know in the comments which one was your favourite, or if you've seen any of the films that I've mentioned. I would love to have a discussion about those films down below. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.